Hello, everyone. Welcome today to the Cut and Splice podcast. If you're surprised to be hearing my voice, do not worry. It is the fourth unofficial member of the podcast, Andrew, back here fresh off the Fountain episode. And we are going to be talking today about one of my favorite and perhaps one of the most commercially successful franchises of all time, the MCU. Yes, Matt and Gil have lost a bet, and they are being forced to have to talk about this stuff. Guys, want to take a moment to say hello?
Hello, everyone. This is Matt.
And this is Jason.
And this is Gil.
And your official hosts are still here, so definitely don't be alarmed. Everything is going to be A-okay.
Well, at least we hope so.
Yeah, that was that was an enthusiastic introduction. It's definitely put us to shame.
Well, there may be blood. It just depends on how deep into the weeds we get. But of course, today everything is going to be related to MCU. I think our main talking point will be starting off with the Avengers, but of course, since the MCU is now up to 29 different movies in the series, there's definitely a lot of room to go. So I don't know who wants to start. Should I? You want to go first?
Well, I could just quickly, just to give the background why the Avengers. I guess that's the 2012 movie.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So because I remember that we thought, should we do Iron Man, because that was the first official movie on the MCU, and then I thought that the Avengers is maybe a slightly more divisive movie that we would have more to conflict on, and it could be a jumping off point to the rest of what came before and what came after, because it does feel in some ways like that's the midway of the MCU, isn't it? As far as it's
It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, but it feels like that was the first phase, and then they kind of went on to set up the next Avenger movies. I mean, there was a sequel, right, to this.
Phase one is the first 5 films and the Avengers in the 6th film. Then phase 2 starts right after that and goes all the way till I think Ant-Man or something like that. And then phase 3 starts with Civil War and goes all the way till the end of Endgame.
Okay. Yeah, but that said, yes, go ahead, Andrew. As far as your overall feelings about the MCU and maybe the Avengers movie.
Yes, absolutely. So, as all the regular listeners know, the many regular listeners, typically we're on this podcast. The guys like to talk about maybe more highbrow movies that people are less familiar with. But,
mostly, but not always.
Yeah. Occasionally there's a Jason episode here.
Oh, well then, I don't know if I should be like flattered or insulted.
I'm just kidding, Jason.
You don't need to be kidding. It's probably a very accurate statement.
But when we start to look at the state of cinema today, there's clearly a very large elephant in the room that has just been kind of running rugged on the industry. And of course, MCU has definitely become a staple for many moviegoers. And one could make the argument that maybe that's not necessarily the best thing, but I'm definitely not going to be doing that today. I think the MCU and the Avengers movies have definitely done a great deal to make movie going into more of a special experience than maybe it had even been before. It definitely makes that something that happens maybe more often than we have had in the past traditionally. And I think it's really given people a reason to go back to movies and see things on the big screen, which I know in conversations in the past, we're all definitely feel very passionately about people seeing movies that way. But I think it would also help because, again, I'm sure everybody's going to have different opinions on this. In side conversations we've had with Matt doesn't really feel like they're movies. He's made the claim that they're television because, and I'll let Matt go into it, but I definitely do not agree with that. So Matt, maybe you want to jump in here and share your perspective.
Okay, so I I think when the MCU started out, there was an element to them that, like, to those movies that, like, were actual movies. They weren't just cliffhangers. And going into like the first Avengers movie, I still think qualified more or less as a movie, in that you could kind of sort of go into that movie blind and still enjoy it. It's not like a tune in next week. It's not like watching an episode of The Walking Dead or something where it's just like, okay, well, tune in 2 years and we'll pay off. We'll finish off your mystery boners. So I think 10 years ago, and I mean, Avengers came out 10 years ago at this point, uh, there was still some art left in the few films and couple of digitals that Marvel had put out to the world. That said, Avengers stood out to me for a very specific reason, which is they brought on a cinematographer in Seamus McGarvey, and somehow that brilliant cinematographer still ended up lighting a movie like an episode of Saved by the Bell. And I mean, to me, that was kind of the indication of the beginning of the end of the artistic strength of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in that, the only way that Seamus McGarvey lights a movie that badly is if the producers get involved and they're looking at the monitors and they're telling him, "Nope, make it flatter, make it flatter, make it flatter. No, make it more boring. No, just go boring. Go boring. No, don't do anything brave. Don't do anything bold. Don't do anything interesting. No, just go boring. Go boring." And he capitulated, and he's never worked with the MCU since. Matthew Libatique shot the first two Iron Man movies, and they look like junk. And we all know that Matthew Libatique is a really good cinematographer. He hasn't worked with the MCU since. I mean, they are only working with people who are willing to bend a knee to the higher ups. And it is hurting the art. Any artistic integrity that the MCU had early on with the first Iron Man movie, with the first Thor movie, and by the way, Kenneth Branagh should get a lot more work in the MCU, but I don't even know if he would want to work with the MCU anymore. I mean, like, he made the best Disney live action remake of all the Disney live action remakes, and he made one of the better MCU films. But I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't want to touch Disney again at this point, because, like, honestly, I think that Disney has managed to castrate the entire universe. So anyway, that's my spiel at the moment. So yeah, I'll let other people talk.
Can I ask you a quick question, Matt? Do you feel like that first Avengers, after that happened, was when they kind of lost you as artistically?
I think that was definitely where I was just kind of like, okay, this is
TV.
This is like clone stamping the Jar Jar Abrams model for making a franchise and just applying it to Disney. Obviously, this came just before The Force Awakens, and I think I'm actually vindicated in that assessment. This came after Jar Jar Abrams destroyed Star Trek, and before he came in and destroyed Star Wars. And I think that we're following the Jar Jar Abrams model of yeah, we're going to just handle our theatrical releases the same way that we would handle television, which is tune in next week, only we get to charge you, $14 a ticket to, to have us finish off your mystery boners instead of, just whatever you're paying for your streaming service. So yeah, I think that was basically the start of the downfall.
Yeah, I think two things to note from what I gathered from Matt said that I think should be brought up is the Edgar Wright moment where he was supposed to do Ant-Man and basically sounds like he wasn't allowed to do what he wanted, and so that was already one moment of castrating a very good filmmaker, and then the opposite example is James Gunn. It is to be noted that the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie is one of the best Marvel movie, and what?
I would
You know,
argue both of them.
second one is not as good as the first. It wasn't as fresh as the first one. He made the JJ mistake of it still had stuff in it for sure. It was like a father-son story and everything, but for some reason it didn't hit all the right notes. It just felt like it was trying to be bigger and better, but didn't focus as much about the relationships. It was just focused on the relationship. But still, yes, probably I would put it up in the upper echelon, even the second one, even though it's a distant from the first Guardians. But just to say, the point is that the cinematography in that movie did look different. I mean, it's definitely done very different. The tone is different than most MCU movies. And the only other movie that I would put in that category is maybe Black Panther. And I think that's also because it was Ryan Coogler, and it was like the first like major like black cast and everything. I think they kind of said like we need to let him do his thing and then make this as great as possible because otherwise. But otherwise, other than that, I agree with Matt. Most of the movies are, Kenneth Branagh did his thing early on, and it's not to say that people don't bring like, Taika Waititi like brought some flair to his Thor movies. Some. I don't think it's amazing. Like Ragnarok is okay. I don't get. Ragnarok reminds me of Iron Man. It's basically a bit funnier than a normal action movie, so people think it's crazy good, but nothing in it was actually that good. It's just that it was more funny than usual. It was funnier than the Avengers, but it's an action movie. It's not supposed to be funny. It's supposed to have comic relief. But it feels like Iron Man started this, and yes, he brought it as well. Waititi, they basically, some of these movies are as opposed to Thor, that was just a tone that was humorous because it was a fish out of water story. The joking around too much, and especially in the Avengers, just bad joking around, a lot of bad dialogue and bad joking around that just doesn't work. The best scene in the Avengers is not actually in between the opening credits and end credits. It's after. It's the shawarma scene. That's the best scene in the movie. But yeah, so I mean that's just some thoughts about there is something to this where this is probably not the way to do it. Like if you're gonna go after the great talents of this generation, then give them some room. Like it doesn't, not every movie needs to look alike, not every movie needs to be toothless. Like give people some freedom and you'll get some great results like James Gunn, like Kenneth Branagh. I think that it would serve them well, but yes, I think money talks. They just, instead of making great movies, they want to make great money makers. That's my conclusion about it. It's not to say that there wasn't any value to these to any of these movies, but it's subtracted from it. And yes, definitely the serializing is a huge problem. But yeah, but that's just my opinion. I just got fatigued very, very, very quickly from the movies. And I think the Avengers was the beginning of that. Once I saw there was a sequel to that, and there's like 4 other ones coming out, and I was like, I think I'm done. Because every time I would see really good reviews, I would watch the movie, and the movie would be subpar, and I'm like, what's up with these reviews? Like, did they buy out the critics too? It's just what bizarre
Yeah.
world am I living in, where every Marvel movie is getting 80-90% on Rotten Tomato, and I'm watching the movie and it's barely a 60-70 quality of a movie. It was just very strange.
Well,
But
I mean that's the problem with like aggregate scores and everything, you know, on Rotten Tomatoes is that, you know, it's not like all the critics have to be saying, "Oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever made." All you need to do to get a high percentage is to have the critics be like, yeah, if you're into that, go for it." You know, and I think that that's been the goal of the entire MCU for the last 10 years. It's just create something that's good enough to get the critics to say, yeah,
like thumbs up.
yeah,
Yeah, but
why
again,
not?
but
You
it's
know,
fatigue. Just the fatigue alone, I would think that critics would just turn on them. I mean, I rated the Avengers 7, and that's a rating from back when, I don't know, probably from 2012, and that's not a bad rating, but it's also not a great rating. It's an average movie. Like the way I feel about most of the MCU, a good 90% of it is just meh. It's just average movies, and that's why I stopped watching them, because I'm not a kid anymore, and I don't have the time to spend watching all these movies. So I'm only gonna watch an 8 or a 9. I'm only gonna watch a movie that's outstanding if I have the time for it. So that's why I felt like all they're giving us is basically TV episodes. If they're all average movies with the occasional like standout, it means you're making too many movies. It means that if you've made half the movies, maybe most of them would be better. I don't know. That's the feeling that I'm getting. It's a quantity versus quality issue.
I couldn't help but think about Roger Ebert's review of Dark City. Roger Ebert just kind of he said in his review of Dark City, uh, if Werner Herzog is right, that we're starved for new images. This is a movie to nourish us. And yeah, I mean, you contrast something like that, and I mean, I put Dark City on a pedestal, unlike most people. I mean, I think it's one of the greatest films ever made. But then you compare that to the MCU, and it's just like, it's like the MCU is just feeding us familiar images all the time. Like you don't go to an MCU movie expecting to see a new image or expecting to see something that you haven't seen before or that you didn't imagine would be on screen before you sat your ass down in the theater and the movie showed up on the screen. You don't go to an MCU movie for that. You go to an MCU movie for familiarity.
Matt, do I remember correctly, or maybe I was misunderstanding what Gil was saying? Did you not rewatch the movie before this podcast?
But Avengers,
Yeah.
I started it. I
No,
saw
but
it
he
like
said that he watched a bunch in the theater because he was projecting it.
No,
Yeah.
I'm talking about rewatching it. I'm talking about watching it right now, like
No,
as in the last 2 days.
no, not in the last 2 days.
It's very frustrating.
Well,
Okay.
I can give you my quick like as far as my evolving view about it, like seeing it, just finished it like yesterday, I think. Um the things that I would maybe, if I were to give credit to, um I don't know. Well, that's the other thing is Joss Whedon. I really feel like he's a very good writer. I don't even think that he's a great writer. I just think he's a very good writer, especially for TV. But he's not a good director. I don't think he was a good choice to direct. They should have like maybe given him like I think, did he write some of the movies early on or something? I don't know how he got into the director's chair, but
Probably
it's
because he
really,
was the best choice.
I guess so, in their mind. Well, yeah, because he's a toothless, like,
Wow.
simple director. He's directed what, mostly TV. I mean, but yeah, and I guess that's what they're going for. They're going for a TV movie, just with a lot of action and a big budget, but it's basically a TV movie. That's what it feels like. The coverage is like a TV movie. Even when they try to do some like fancy like movement with the camera, it almost reminiscent of like TNG. um, but um, but yeah, it's as far as like giving it credit, it's a good cast. Like they definitely, like, it was a solid cast, and yes, I do agree. I give it props for mostly being a standalone movie. Um, but other than that, they did kind of rip off the ID4, like the Independence Day ending with the whole, the thing aiming towards the core of the ship, or at least in this the entrance. That kind of, I like that touch. That was like a good moment. But the rest of it is a lot of banter, so dialogue, just not, even though it's a very good cast, they're not at their best because they're just not given the best material. It's just a very more than anything, it's a kiddie movie. It's got touches. It touches a little bit about some of the stuff that comes up in the Captain America movies, especially I guess the big one is the Winter Soldier, right?
Mhm.
That was a bit more mature. It was going more for a Dark Knight type of thing, where like there's morality is in question and all these things. Like they touch on that here as well, with the communication between uh, Sam Jackson and and the League of Shadows. Like, what's up with all these like politicians that are like backlit? Like the whole movie looks like shit, but the politicians are backlit. It's like, um, anyways, but yeah, it's like a little touches like that. It just feels like a bit too hammy. The whole movie was just too hammy, just too kiddie, too hammy. You compare this to like Nolan's Batman movies or even the recent Batman movie, and it's just a kids movie. Even the Spider-Man movies were more mature, the Sam Raimi ones.
That is not accurate.
I mean, the first one and the
You
second
go
one.
rewatch them. That is not an accurate statement at all.
Well, especially the second one, I think was a very
The
serious
second one
movie.
had more meat to it. It was no more serious at all. At all. Less so, significantly less.
It might have had comic like relief, but it really feels like especially Joss Whedon definitely goes for it, and Jon Favreau and Iron Man, they're jokesters. Like they just are. It's just
And
Jon
Sam
Favreau
Raimi isn't?
Sam Raimi is a
Sam
bit.
Raimi is hilarious. I'm not. Nothing I'm saying is a dig at Sam Raimi. I love Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, come on. Like,
Well, he definitely went too far in the third one, but
that was just trash.
yeah, but it's basically this. The second one is where he calibrated himself, and then the third one he got a little bit too happy.
I definitely agree that the second one is the best one for sure.
Yeah, but I don't know. But obviously, like Jason, you should go. Like, as because I think
it's hard to know where to start. Honestly,
yeah,
it's very hard to know where to start. I mean, Matt didn't watch the movie, so I can definitely understand that he's drawing off of the last. I don't know, Matt. When did you see it last? 7 years ago? 6 years ago?
More recently than that, but I mean,
all I'm saying is that you're drawing off of your negative opinion that you already had about the movie. Gil, I don't know what your excuse is. If you just watched this movie, I don't get it because I don't know what you saw. Honestly, I don't. Like, look, Matt has been saying for years now that the MCU as a whole and the Avengers looks like an episode of Saved by the Bell. He's been saying that for years and years and years. That is a gross exaggeration. Now, is it a more vibrant movie? Is it lit more flat and a little bit brighter in general than something like Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy? Yes. However, it's supposed to be. I mean, like, Matt, you complaining about, well, for starters, let me just say very clearly that there are tons of scenes in this movie that take place in the belly of the flying aircraft carrier. There's scenes at night in Calcutta. There's scenes at night in other places. There's moments, I was like sitting there just watching this 25 minutes ago as like Captain America walks out of the room where he just got done talking to Tony Stark and Banner, and he's concerned because they've now put doubt into his mind about the military people that he's following around without questioning. And he walks out of the room, and they've got half his face lit, like very dark, because he's like in that moment he's realizing he needs to make a choice, and he's, you know, it's a moment that deserves some, you know, some contrast on his face. This movie is not lit like a shitty like sitcom. It is brighter, but your comparison is a gross exaggeration. Now, that being said, let me just say that for you to say that you don't like the way it's lit, that's fine. I mean, that's okay. You got to understand what this movie is. Okay, like for decades throughout the 90s and stuff, we had very subpar comic book movies. And really, I would argue that the only really good one up until the mid 90s was basically the first Tim Burton Batman movie. And that was a Batman movie. As we started, you got to look at the eras of these things. There's everything that came before X-Men. There's everything from X-Men to probably, you could argue, maybe Batman Begins, but I would argue really like 2007 or whatever, when or 8, whatever year it was that that Iron Man came out, and then everything since then. Those are kind of like the 3 eras of comic book movies in my eyes. Everything that came before was trash. Now, you have a few standouts, obviously, but for the most part, they're pretty bad movies. And then suddenly, X-Men happened. And when X-Men happened, the studios all said, whoa, we can make money off this shit? And then you started the next, like, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years, 8 years, almost 10 years of time, where they were cranking. Marvel sold off a ton of its rights to a bunch of things. So did other companies. They started cranking out movies left and right. Fox, Sony, all these different companies, right? During this era, what you see very clearly are studios that are ashamed to be making comic book movies. They're trying to take these comic book movies, they're trying to ground them in reality. They're taking the costumes that the characters wear, they're making them all black, and they're trying to be tactical with stuff. You see it in Daredevil, you see it in X-Men and X-Men 2. You see it all over the place. They're not to say that some of those aren't decent movies. X-Men 2 is actually very good. But the point is that you can clearly see that this was an era where they were just trying to make the money off the comic book movies, but they're ashamed of what they're making. They're trying to change it into something it's not. When Spider-Man came out, Sam Raimi, that was the first time that someone made a successful comic book movie to that caliber and that quality, and it looked like a comic book movie. It was bright and vibrant. The comic book, or the costume, was comic book appropriate. It was a breath of fresh air. It was fun. It was funny. Little kids could see it. Adults could see it. Everyone could enjoy it. It was uplifting. That's the way that kind of comic book, specifically because it's Spider-Man, should be. Now, you're looking for like this, ultra real, dark, gritty kind of thing, like which was perfect for the Christopher Nolan Batman films. That's fine, but that's totally wrong for Superman, for Spider-Man, for X-Men, for Captain America, for Iron Man, etc. Doesn't matter what. So to complain about the look of these films would be like, if Matt and Gil had never seen a noir film ever, and any kind whatsoever, and I were to show you guys the movie like Payback or Blade Runner, some of these like neo-noir films, and you guys were like, oh man, I liked those movies, but God, you know what? I just don't like how the color was desaturated. I don't like it how dark it was. I don't like the overuse of Venetian blinds. You know, I'm sitting here going like, guys, it's a neo-noir film. That's kind of what they're going for. It's appropriate. Now, you don't like it, that's one thing. But that's not how it's supposed to be. They're going for something specific. They achieved it beautifully, and you know, it's kind of dumb to complain about it, especially to the point that you're of these like gross exaggerations that you're making about the light.
Okay, can I
Sure.
tell you why you're wrong now? Uh, it's not an issue with the movies being bright. It's an issue with the movies having no artistic visual voice. I mean, the movie Starship Troopers was actually lit more like an episode of Saved by the Bell
Agreed.
than Avengers, but that movie actually kind of works because it's all satire.
Agreed.
It was deliberate. Right. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm somebody who knows Seamus McGarvey's work pretty dang well. I know. I still can't pronounce the guy's freaking last name, but Harris Zambrolakis's work pretty damn well. I mean, it's not just an issue of the movies being lit flat. It's a movie. It's an issue with these guys who are some of the best artists that we have working nowadays coming in and Zemberlak. Sorry, I've never heard his name spoken out loud. Kenneth Branagh, cinematographer. Kenneth Branagh, cinematographer on Thor, was one of the last cinematographers who worked in the MCU where I'm actually like, oh yeah, that looks like something that he would do. Same as McGarvey. Like, he goes from making films like Atonement, which not one of the best movies ever made, but
it looked nice.
Holy crap! Did the cinematographer have a voice in that movie? Matthew Libatique. Holy crap! Did he have a voice? Making The Fountain.
Right. So let me just jump back in then. I get what you're saying, and I actually don't entirely disagree with you. But I think there's a little more to it than you're giving it. Like, for instance, now I don't want to go on record and saying that I totally know every single facet of this backstory of how this all happened, but gathered from what I've read and from what I've talked with other people, it sounds to be like this is the case. But especially in the first phase or so, the first 5 or 6 movies, I do think that there was a lot of stuff that they were doing that I think there was a lot of stifling of creativity, as you guys are, pointing at, basically. Now, I agree with you. I think that you don't need to hire the greatest cinematographer, the most creative cinematographers out there, if you want a pretty simple and consistent visual style all the way through these films. That's fine, and I get that, and I agree with you. And I also agree with you that overall, I think that a little bit more variety, not just in the look, but also in the feel, the directing of these films, would probably benefit this stuff. But
yes,
that being said, it's important to also point out the progress. Like, I know Gil has said that he hasn't watched a whole lot of the stuff in the last probably 10 or so movies that have come out or whatever from the MCU. And I don't remember how many Matt told me he had seen. I do remember him telling me he saw the last Spider-Man movie. But anyway, my point is that, back to what I was saying with the first phase, it's like, yes, so they got Kenneth Branagh to do the first one. I've never heard anything positive or negative from him, any comment or anything. It's possible that he just felt like he only felt like doing one and didn't have any interest in doing another, or maybe he had a bad experience. I don't know. You did point out how several of the cinematographers worked 1 or 2 times and then never worked again with them. I would argue that that sounds more like this issue that I'm talking about, because if you remember, not only did during phase 2 did Edgar Wright do a bunch of work on Ant-Man and then quit the project and leave because he didn't feel like it was going to be his movie anymore. Also, look at Jon Favreau. Like, he did the first one, and I don't think the second one, which I'm not ashamed to say is one of my least favorite MCU movies. He did the second one, and I don't think he was happy with it at all, because afterward he decided to not come back for the third one, and he went off and made the movie Chef. And if you've ever seen the movie Chef, it's about a very talented and artistic chef who had a lot of success early on in his career. Meta. And then got stuck in a restaurant with a boss who would not allow him to do anything but the exact same thing over and over and over again. And then when a critic came, everything blows up because he refuses to step in line, and then he gets fired and or quits, depending on how you look at it. And then he goes off and finds his own little creative voice, and it's obviously a big metaphor for what happened to him with that whole process. I mean, there's even moments where he's, obviously the food is a metaphor for the films, and he's like saying, the guy didn't like it, and you want me to make the exact same meal? Like, are you kidding me? And they're like, you got to make the exact same meal. And he's like going crazy. It's obvious what that was. But all that being said, it's pretty clear from the stuff that he's now come back to put his input on and to help out with and whatever. I believe that after they got rid of that other guy who was kind of in charge with Feige, and Kevin Feige kind of got the reins of the whole MCU and everything, it seems pretty clear to me that that's when they were kind of given a little bit more, free reign to do stuff. Favreau was happy to come back and and talk during their big round table thing that they did. It seems clear that he's put in his input in the stuff that they needed his help with in the later Avengers movies and stuff like that. You've got people, even Joss Whedon, who had a horrible experience with the second Avengers movie, came back for that as well. And then right as that happened, they were both commenting in that round table thing about how they were really surprised and they were really happy to see that they allowed Taika Waititi to do what he wanted to do and make his kind of movie. And all I'm saying is that if you watch all the movies, I think while some of them are not as good as others, I definitely think that you see them kind of allowing them to do more later on. But also, just in general, I think that your statement that there's no variety in these movies is wrong. I mean, aside from just the first Thor movie that you mentioned and the Guardians films, which have a very distinctive feel to them, very different from the rest of them. Ant-Man is a heist movie. It's very funny, and it has an entirely different kind of humor to it than what you'd find in, like, say, Thor or something. Certainly different from what you'd find in the last Taika Waititi movies, the 2 Thor movies. And those 2 movies are extremely different. I mean, and then as you mentioned, Black Panther is pretty darn different as well. I would argue that Captain Marvel is too. I just kind of think that some of the reasons why it's different are not necessarily some of the strengths, but that's a whole nother discussion.
It's definitely interesting because when it comes to some of Matt and Gil's criticisms, I definitely feel very much aligned with it. I frankly have gotten a bit disillusioned with the MCU since we've lost Robert Downey Jr. and of course Chris Evans. I think the loss of that star power hasn't really helped the MCU.
I would agree with that too.
I think they've been struggling, but I think when you talk about the artistic quality of the movies, we have to definitely keep in mind, they are popcorn movies, definitely geared towards maybe more family and more younger people. They're not necessarily striving towards, hitting grand slams like with The Dark Knight. But I mean, the key is I think MCU is heading to a point where they are getting more open to variety. I definitely feel the hands of television on the MCU with some of your guys' points. I think they're fair, but I think it's an ever evolving process. Like they're figuring out what to do and how to adjust and how to make these movies still be relevant and interesting to an audience. And they, more often than not, aren't even necessarily successful. I frankly haven't been very happy with the last few, MCU titles that I've seen, and I usually see every single one at the movie theaters. But it'll be really interesting to see what we get on the other side. But I find it difficult to think that they're without artistic merit, especially since they are trying to execute a very specific type of art, maybe their vision of art, clearly. But I definitely wouldn't say it's without merit. One of the problems with, Matt bringing up like the Dark City, for example, I definitely admire his passion for it. But the problem is that, how many people have actually seen it? Right. So, I mean, it's difficult to have that be part of the conversation when, that's not really something that with people get that much exposure to. And, let's say you have the Matrix at the same time. And, the Matrix is what everybody knows because that's what people actually went to see. So I think it's important to keep in mind that the MCU culturally, is something that's been extremely relevant over the last 10 or so years of filmmaking. And it's something is likely to be relevant for the foreseeable future. And my hope is that, artists, directors, cinematography, everybody gets the creative freedom to be able to make these movies more different and be able to put more of their touches and personal spin on it, because ultimately we get way better movies. Like the ones we're talking about, these beloved, standout gems, were the ones where, it felt like they did have the creative freedom to do that. The more we can have of that, I think the better off we'll all be seeing these movies.
I guess just a few things to touch on or respond. The serialization, the issue that I have with it, I do agree that much like a Star Trek TV show or any good TV show, you're going to have some subpar episodes, but you're going to have those standouts. So I think it's perfectly fine if not every movie is going to be a home run, and there'll be the occasional Guardians of the Galaxy, Black Panther, the Winter Soldier. Like some of these movies definitely stand out. But the big issue I have with the serialization is that I can't watch all these movies. I just don't have the time to do it. And then when they come with these like big event moments, like the second Avenger phase with the end game and whatever the other one is.
That would have been the third phase, but yeah, we know.
Yeah. But in any case, that there's not enough context. I watched those movies, and there's just not enough context. And yes, they're better made than the Avengers. And I didn't watch Age of Ultron because I just heard bad things, and the Avengers was just not great, so I just didn't see it. But still, even still, it just feels like a lot of noise and a lot of fluff and just a lot of just nothingness. I don't know. There's and the counter argument to that, I understand that saying Dark City is not helpful. Matrix would be a better example. The Batman movies would be a better example. I understand that not all comic books look alike. The X-Men movies were fairly colorful, but X-Men 2 was actually about something. It was an allegory to being homosexual, that that they're part of society, but they're not accepted by society because they're queer. Bryan Singer finally went to that, to a private place and made a great movie. If only there was more of that. It only proved, and then Christopher Nolan proved it with his Batman movies, that action movies can make a lot of money and be challenging for an audience, be very smart, and also look dramatic. Like it doesn't have to be the Dark Knight dramatic, but it needs to not be comedy lighting. Most of the Avenger movies and the MCU are basically comedy lighting. That's what those movies look like. And it's just for me personally, and maybe it's for Matt too, because we're into cinematography. It just doesn't fly. It doesn't make sense. So little touches like that, where we've seen in the past people prove again and again that smart movies can make monies, movies that say something can make money, and movies that are dramatically done, whether it's the color design like The Matrix, and whether it's the lighting with the Batman trilogy, that can sell tickets. That's doable. So to not even attempt to just play it too safe to the lowest common denominator and not challenge the audience one bit, just giving them good looking actors that do a good job and whimsical, like comical dialogue that's going to like keep us happy and eating popcorn while the action unfolds, in front of us, but no actual strong, complicated subjects, dialogue just built into it. Fucking like Pixar. Look at Pixar. They make kids from movies that are smarter than any MCU movie. Super smart. Like Wall-E, like Inside Out, Up. Super sophisticated, complicated movies that kids love. I mean, the Toy Story ones. So don't tell me that you can't find smart, talented writers, directors that can make sophisticated, smart comic book movies that look great, but also would appeal to a large audience. Don't tell me that that's not possible. At least try. I mean, and again, we've proven that James Gunn's done it, and Ryan Coogler's done it. So let's do more of that. Free people up. Show us that it's possible. You have the built-in audience for it. So be a bit more daring. And yeah, and don't like obstruct Jon Favreau in trying to do something different if the second one didn't work. Just let people go and see what they come up with. That's the only criticism I have about it. But it's fine. I mean, I think I've said this on the show before. I'm not married to these things. I was brokenhearted by the Transformers, the Star Trek movies. Big deal. So I just don't have to watch it. That's why I stopped watching it after the Avengers, because I was like, I'm kind of out. I just, this thing has nothing for me. It just doesn't have the appeal of a Star Wars like saga. They're barely average movies. Why do I keep following this plot line? But yeah, I came back to Black Panther because that was interesting. That was different. And I think I saw Guardians 2. I don't know when Guardians like actually 1 came after, because that was different. So whenever there's a different one, I almost saw the Doctor Strange, because I thought, oh, maybe like a multiverse, maybe there'll be something different about it. But then I read the reviews and I was like, it sounds like it's just another Marvel movie, so I skipped it. So it's disappointing. It's disappointing because they have all these different characters that each of them can have their own little thing, and they don't completely capitalize on it. They do to some degree. I agree. Maybe the Wasp, the whatchamacallit, the Ant-Man is a different tone because it's more of a comedy. But even that, they made it toothless by removing Edgar Wright and going for a safer choice.
Yeah, and Gil, I definitely identify a lot with what you're saying, but I definitely also don't think that the movies are completely devoid of trying to touch on some of that stuff. You've mentioned some of the gems that have been very successful with really kind of helping to have that deeper subtext. But even in something like the Avengers, I definitely felt like there was still some of that at play. It's just that the problem with Marvel movies, especially in this earlier phases, they were just trying to cram so much shit into like one movie, and especially with the universe building, that it made it difficult just to tell a simple and successful story. And with the Avengers, you have so many different characters in it, but they all did have little different things. It's just it was crammed in a lot, and I don't think maybe you necessarily cared for the package. It's funny, some of the criticisms that you have, campy dialogue and stuff. Some of the stuff I love the best about the movie. Especially Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark. Any line of that out of the movie he has, it's just to me spectacular. But I mean,
yeah, I don't know what kind of dialogue you want, to be honest. I think, especially when it comes to the Avengers, I think it's outstanding. Yeah, I'm not saying the best I've ever seen. Nothing close to that, but I mean, shit.
I can try to give you the specific examples, but to me, if I compare that to say like The Dark Knight. That was a serious movie that had light moments.
Apples
Or you know what?
and oranges.
Something different. Independence Day. And Independence Day, or
Same kind of dialogue. You have quality comedic lines that do not detract from the story. They just provide levity. Same thing.
but for some reason I can't explain it. As I'm watching it, it feels a bit too forced. And these are good actors. These are good actors.
I don't know what to say. It's like you're watching a different movie.
I'm actually gonna briefly hop in on Jason and Andrew's side here. I'm not in general, like broadly, but I mean, particularly with Captain America, they actually managed to give him some really poignant, powerful lines during the course of his tenure on the in the franchise. I mean, some of the lines that they gave him, like hit me right in the gut. But
he gets the real meat for sure.
Yeah.
Well, because he's the Boy Scout, yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, when you've got Tony Stark on one side who's making a lot of jokes, which is fine because it's kind of his character, and then you've got Thor who's being dead serious, but to us it's funny because of the way he reacts to things very unnaturally. It leaves Cap being the most serious out of all of them. He's the parent in the room.
The adult.
Yeah. But I mean, the funny thing in this whole discussion is that there really is no way to please everybody. I mean, like the most recent Batman movie was basically my ideal level of levity. I mean, like I don't like levity. I like movies that suck your soul out and make you feel like a piece of shit when you're done. I mean, to me, the thumb drive line in the Batman was actually enough levity for me. Like, okay, that's funny.
That movie had almost no levity. It had like three. That's why I'm scared.
It's definitely not a good example.
Because the thumb drive scene and the moment where the greatest moment in that entire movie, actually, when the Penguin is like waddling away with his little shackles on his feet.
Yeah,
it's like I don't know why I was the only one in the theater laughing my ass off. I thought that was incredibly funny, but that's it. Like the movie has no levity. Like read a Batman comic. It's got a lot of levity and it's, maybe less so when it's written by Frank Miller, but I mean, he's one of dozens and dozens of authors who've, written Batman. I mean, I think Nolan's movies have just the right amount of levity in them for Batman.
Yeah, I definitely think like when it comes to comic book movies, like The Dark Knight, without question, is the gold standard. And it's a perfect example of kind of like the point we're all making. Like when you go and you give a filmmaker the creative freedom to do what they want to do, and you let them utilize the talents at its disposal to do what they do best, you're going to get a great movie, always. And
no, not always, but I think you'll get something. You'll get a daring movie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the problem I think with the MCU is that they just don't do that. And I think maybe it's for the universe building or just for the sake of consistency or whatever. But it's it's something I definitely hope they get to the point that they do. I think, unfortunately, Matt, most people aren't like you, where they can't do movies for like 3 hours with a joke or two. Like it's I think
it's not about can't, it's about don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, like I personally, like I enjoyed the Batman. I don't think I'm in a hurry to see it again, like the way I was with Dark Knight. Dark Knight, I walk out of it, I want to go back and I want to see it several times in theaters. The Batman, I'm one and done. I could go back, never see it again, and be perfectly happy. And I think that was one of the key differences was that lack of levity to help break up all the darkness that was a part of it.
Sadness, clouds, crime.
Well, Well, about the Avengers, like as far as the humor in this, I didn't rewatch it, of course, but Iron Man I think was similar. It's just that Tony Stark character is just too jokey. It's just his character, but he's not the Joker. It's like there's one thing if in a Batman movie the Joker is going to be funny at times, but it feels like every other line from his mouth is like this snarky, humorous thing, and it's just
met people that are like that witty.
it's too much. Again, like if you go back to like Independence Day, it's comic relief. It's not comedy. Like it needs to be a relief every once in a while to have levity. It's not a barrage of jokes. This is not a Mel Brooks movie. We don't need to crack a joke every time like, there's an exchange between two characters. It needs to come just in the right moment to have a moment of levity. Not like
I mean, I think that's just his character. I mean, there's people out there that are very witty and very wry, and I think that when you have someone of his talent in a movie, and every time he's on screen, he's doing that, and then you get a moment where things get very real, and he's not joking around anymore, and then you feel it. You're like, oh shit, this guy's actually being serious.
He's a good actor. There's no doubt. Like I said, the cast is one of the better things, but I do think this is not their best work. I mean, they're doing okay with so material, but yeah, mostly it's just cartoonish. What it feels to me like it's a live action cartoon. That's what but not Pixar cartoon. That's what it feels to me. That it's a kiddie movie where the original Star Wars trilogy and Independence Day and some of these my favorite like action movies, T2, The Matrix, those are adult movies. Those are adult action movies. Like even 300, Watchmen, just to give examples, even X2 I felt like went in the right direction, but that kind of, but they didn't continue it, I think, with the new next generation movies. Like those were a little bit meh. Like I just feel like those are adult movies. Like this is live action comic books. It's not a cartoon. Go to the Disney Plus and watch the TV Marvel shows. This is in the theater, big screen, live action, great actors. Give me an adult movie. Even the original Superman was more adult than this, even though it was tongue in cheek. It was tongue in cheek, but it was more serious than this. It was more serious. It was more serious.
I hate to say this because I know that it's not going to happen, but I think this is simply a matter of I think where I'm not getting through to you is simply a matter of perspective, because I think you're looking back on Superman. I think you're looking back on some of the X-Men movies and the Spider-Man movies and stuff like that in the past, the way you saw them then. I think if you were to sit down and do a massive movie marathon and watch the old Superman movies, I think if you were to watch at least the first two anyway, those third and fourth ones are unwatchable almost. But if you were to watch the 4 Batman movies from the 90s, the 80s and 90s, if you were to watch the movies, the comic book movies that came in the early aughts, like the X-Men films again, watch Daredevil, watch that bad Fantastic Four movie or two that they made, and then you were to go and watch the straight up garbage that's being made by DC and stuff like that outside of the Nolan trilogy, obviously, it should go without saying at this point. I think if you were to watch these movies, you would realize, and then also watch every single Pixar movie that's ever been made. I think you'd realize that what you're saying is pretty much accurate, except you're only watching you're cherry picking. That's the problem. Like if you look, I love the Pixar movies. I love them. I really do. I'm not even sure if there's any of them I don't like. Maybe if I really thought about it and looked at the whole list, I might be able to pick out one or two or something like that. But
Brave.
I love Brave. I just think it has a really bad.
Oh, geez,
first and third act
I
of
thought that
Brave
was
are very
awful.
good. No, that's a
Okay,
good one.
but
Anyway, all I'm saying is, I agree with you. Wall-E, Up, certainly Inside Out, Toy Story 3. There are gems within Pixar that are so amazingly good. It's like I don't even know how someone could be that good of a filmmaker. The Incredibles is one of them too. But look at all of them. There's a bunch of lesser Pixar movies out there as well that aren't even close to that standard. And when you look at how many movies Pixar has made, I would say that the ones that fall close to what you just said are about 1 out of 3, maybe less. And if you look at, you did mention, you were kind enough to kind of say, look, well, there's been some movies in the MCU that did have more to them. They had meat, they were a little more mature in what they were trying to communicate. And you were like, okay, there's Captain America 1 or the 2 and 3, and the Guardians movies, and maybe this other one or that one. Like, you count them up, you get up to about 8 movies or so. We're right about at 1 out of 3 right there. I mean, all I'm trying to say is that if you watched every single one of these movies, you'd realize that like some of the ones you're kind of complaining about are actually like pretty good. You know what I mean? Like, and then you're comparing them to the best of these other things, and you're saying they fall short compared to this, they fall short compared to that. And it's like, well, some of the stuff you're comparing it to doesn't have some stellar things either. And also, finally, I should just say, I think if you were to somehow go back and find the time to rewatch everything I just said, I think you'd realize that those X-Men movies were full of goofy ass jokes, like some straight up goofy stuff. Same thing with Spider-Man. I mean, the stuff they have Norman Osborn doing in that Green Goblin costume is it makes you roll your eyes. It's like, oh, Sam Raimi, I love you, but what are you doing? And then certainly the Superman stuff. Yes, I get that the one thing I love about that original Superman is its tone is fantastic and consistent. But I mean, the flying around the world backwards to try and like save the day at the end.
That was stupid. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff. If you rewatched these movies and had a fresh take on each one, I really think you'd sit here and go, you know what? Maybe these Marvel movies aren't for me, but they're a lot better than a lot of the stuff I just mentioned or just watched.
I wouldn't say they're better, by the way, but I'm not disagreeing with your point that some of them are good. I made that point. So, but yes, you're gonna have a hit if you have these many shots at it. That's and I do think Pixar is more than 1 out of 3, but that's not a fair comparison. Pixar is an oddity as far as like their consistency.
I would argue that the MCU is too when you look at comic book movies.
No, they're not. I'm sorry. Pixar is more 2 out of 3, where this is barely 1 out of 3. For me, not for you. It would be maybe 2 out of 3.
I said I didn't say. I mean, out of all comic book movies.
Out of all no, again, I can name 10 right now that I like better than most of these.
Go ahead.
I mean, the Dark Knight, like the first and second like Tim Burton movies, the 300, Watchmen, X2, Spider-Man 2. See, I'm almost like I'm close to 10, and I haven't even touched the MCU. Yeah, the for Superman 1 and 2. I would probably put Batman Begins before. Batman Begins. I'm not crazy about it. I
don't have
if I would give an honorary like top 10, like I would give it to Guardians, even though it's technically not a superhero movie. I mean, they are like a comic book, but
it's absolutely a superhero movie.
Yeah, so Guardians. I would give Guardians just because I feel like,
Guardians is more of a superhero movie than 300.
Yeah, no, that's true. As far as comic book movies, I think we're talking, but yes, as far as probably that one would make it. That's the only one that would make it, probably, like top 10, and that's not good. That's not good with the amount of money that's being poured into these movies. I really think if you
rewatch every movie you just listed, you'd see that Batman Returns is full of completely inappropriate, tone deaf, terrible humor. I mean,
Oh
don't
no,
get me
no,
wrong,
but
there's
that's
good
Tim
stuff.
Burton. Yeah, and I loved
There's
it.
good stuff that I
I was
love in
obsessed
that
with
movie.
that movie.
I really like a lot of stuff in that movie, but that movie is a bad film. Like just
Okay,
plain.
but
It's,
that was a consistent tone there.
it's
Go ahead,
not. The
man.
first one is pretty
Okay.
consistent. That second one's all over the place.
Maybe I can just make a quick observation and then
Sure.
we can get Andrew back in. But like, fundamentally, I think we're getting down into the weeds of personal preferences, and the reality is that we can make certain observations about movies that are just true or false.
Sure.
Man of the Hands of Fate is not as good of a movie as The Godfather.
Yeah.
Let's just get that out of the way. There are just objectively bad decisions that have been made in movies in the past. But look, when it comes to superhero movies, I think that Logan is one of the top 5 ever made, probably top 3 ever made.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about
Okay.
Logan.
I
I almost
mean,
don't consider it. Yeah,
yeah,
it's kind of like
I mean,
like the Joker.
right? That's a fucking
Don't get me
masterpiece.
started on that.
But the reality is too that if I were a critic that were actually being considered in the aggregate score of Rotten Tomatoes, I would probably be on the plus side of the fuck it, go ahead and see it side for most of the MCU stuff. I would probably just be like, okay, if you want to take your kids to see a movie and you want it to be safe and you want it to be something that like they're not gonna be traumatized by some violence or gore or sex or anything like that, and maybe you'll have some fun too, and it's just gonna be 2 hours, and it's a safe bet. Go for it. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the Will Smith movie Hitch. I personally hated that movie, but if you like stupid romantic comedies where the woman in the relationship is a complete bitch, go for it. Hey, that's that's your prerogative.
We should do an episode on Hitch.
Yes.
So I mean, it is just one of those things where like I mean, it doesn't seem all that useful to just clash over personal preferences. I mean, we can make certain observations. I mean, I think that I am right that the MCU has kind of gotten to the point where it's a corporately managed machine where basically they're just putting movies on an assembly line, and every so often they'll throw a bunch of money on somebody who can screw the screw into the hole better than everybody else, but then they mandate that person not screw the screw into the hole better than everybody else, but rather just do it the way that they want it to be done. And that's kind of holding the artistic nature of all of those movies back, that it's become too uniform, that it's become heartless, that it's become something that and also, by the way, every so often has come to like the heroes making really immoral decisions. But and that but the thing is, I can find it tiresome and I can tune out, but that's not going to mean that I'm going to tell you that you have to find it tiresome and you have to tune out. It's your money. If you want to piss it away on She-Hulk, go away and piss it away on She-Hulk. I don't care. Do go for it.
Real quick,
But
Matt.
yeah.
Just to clarify, I I found what you said very interesting, but just to qualify your statement, how many Marvel MCU movies have you seen since or like after Captain America Civil War?
Well, both Infinity War, War and Endgame came after that, right?
Yes.
So I've seen those. I've seen all of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies because I love Tom Holland.
He is great.
I would
That's
totally
like
have
5?
sex with him if I were a
Oh my
woman or
God.
gay. uh, and I think that No Way Home was actually a very pleasant surprise from the MCU.
It was the best movie of last year, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I would say that it's the best Marvel movie of last year, but no, it was pretty damn solid. So I don't know specifically how many, but
I just wanted to point out, because like I'm not trying to make a big disagreement or anything, and I'm obviously Andrew needs to talk and everything like that. You said I feel like at this point this is what Marvel as a corporate thing it represents, but since the end of phase 2 you've only seen 5 of the movies, and at the end of phase 2 was like 15 movies, so you've seen like 1 out of 3.
I don't know if that's a good argument, though.
I'm not even saying he's wrong. I'm just saying it feels weird that you'd be making that statement because you haven't seen that many of them in the last like 4 to 5 years.
But the point that at least I was making, I'm not sure to speak for Matt, is that every time I pop my head out and watch one of these movies because they get rave reviews, they're subpar, they're average. So eventually you give up.
Yeah, I guess that's the point. At what point am I allowed to just like tap out and say I'm done?
I think you're allowed to do that at any point. I just think that you're making a statement based on limited information. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but that's not. I disagree. I think if you watch enough of these movies, you give them enough of a chance, and they fail you again and again and again, it means that there's an issue there.
I think there's an issue with the movies. You don't like comic book movies.
I like comic book movies when they're done right. I mean, I just named a bunch of them that I liked. So, and again, I totally agree with Matt. It's a matter of preference.
I think the ones you mentioned, I think there's a clear case to be made that the ones that you mentioned, with the exception of you remember earlier on, really early on when we first started this thing, you said, or maybe Matt said, I think it was you said, that not all comic book movies or not all comic books are the same. There's different kinds of comic books out there. Wolverine, when he's alone and not with the other X-Men, and Batman, particularly because some of the most famous stuff written about those two characters came from a pretty dark time at the end of the 80s, is very much not a good representation of comic books. I would say that the vast majority of what you listed as those almost 10 movies that you said you really liked better than almost every other MCU movie are movies that were made before they were making movies like comic books. So that's all I'm saying. It's just that maybe, since I would say these are how comic book movies should be made. These capture what a traditional superhero movie experience is like, or a superhero comic book reading experience is like, especially when you get to the really good ones, like say Civil War or something like that. That feels like a comic book when you're watching that movie. And if you don't like it, that's okay. But maybe you're just not a big comic book person,
I'm a movie guy. Exactly. If you're translating, it's the whole adaptation thing. Not everything is going to look exactly the way it is on a page. You do need to dramatize it for the screen. If the painting is flat on the comic books, doesn't mean that it needs to have comedy lighting in the movie. You can dramatize the lighting a bit. You don't have to go like Sin City dramatic, but somewhere in between. An adult movie, an adult dramatic movie would be nice, not full-blown like Dumb and Dumber lighting.
I think if we were to sit and watch Dumb and Dumber and Saved by the Bell on one screen and watch about at least 85% of the MCU movies, I think you'd see that that's a pretty big exaggeration.
No, it's basically they're dark when it's at night, and then they're bright when it's like day. That's pretty much it. There's not a lot of dramatization there, as opposed to like Mystic River. They're like broad daylight, and like there's all dark shadows on their faces. So obviously you can manipulate light to
I know you
for
can
a
manipulate
dramatic
light.
effect.
I even agree with you that they'd probably be better off if they did it more often. I'm just saying, I think
Yeah.
you and Matt are exaggerating.
Okay, and I think you're over defending these movies. I think we're both biased, but now we should let Andrew go.
Yes, I agree.
Well, I was simply going to say, we're definitely talking about the Avengers, which is like 10 years ago from MCU perspective. Like the movies are a bit different now. They are changing. Like Gil, you mentioned like how heavy-handed the comedy was in the original Avengers. Well, there really hasn't been a movie that comedically heavy from the MCU, I would say, up until we hit Thor Ragnarok. But the nice thing is because there are so many of these movies being made, they are being given a bit of a rope to be a bit different and to try different things. And with characters that aren't as well known, you have things like the Eternals that came out, which was very different than I think any of the MCU movies that have come before it. Doctor Strange, the Madness of the Multiverse, was definitely very different. Definitely had Sam Raimi's thumbprint on there. He
Absolutely.
probably didn't have the same creative freedom, but like some of the comparisons and some of the things you guys are talking about are a bit different when it comes to like what MCU movies are coming out now. Now they are still flawed. They still do suffer from some of the things that you all have been talking about. Like there's a lot of what Gil and Matt have said when it comes to their criticisms that I think are totally valid. But I for me, for somebody who's mainly been a popcorn movie guy, an action movie guy, and stuff like that, I always try to find the substance wherever I can, and I don't necessarily think this is just like, as Matt would like to say, like an opiate for the masses. There is some meat there. Maybe it's not done necessarily that well or that complex, but it's not completely devoid of it either. So, I definitely want to like add that context because we are getting a very different set of MCU movies going forward, especially now that they're not depending on the star power of some of the bigger names that we had before.
But yeah, as far as the just the what you call it, Doctor Strange, the issue with having that newer movie, the Sam Raimi one, is that I can't watch it before I watch the first two, right? Because there's two other ones that started with Doctor
There's
Strange.
only one other one, but you are correct. There's I was trying to tell the Doctor Strange 2 is a movie that I think falls. It's a perfect example of what you guys were talking about, of the problem with the serialization aspect of it. Now, I personally don't think that's as much of a problem as you guys do, but I do agree that it's a problem just because that's a movie that for you to really, really appreciate it, I think unquestionably you'd need to see Doctor Strange 1. And then you need to see Endgame and Infinity War if you didn't see those. And then I would argue that you need to watch at least some like the last half, if not the entirety of the WandaVision TV show, because her character plays a huge part in it, and that's asking a lot. I mean, it's I was trying to tell my dad when I was about to go, I was like, hey, you want to go see the Marvel movie with me? And he was like, I don't know. He's like, do you think I'd like it? And I thought about what movies he's seen, and I was like, no, I don't think, I think you're going to be lost. Actually, honestly, I was just trying to be honest with him. I was like, geez, I kind of got down on my head and thought about it in my head. And I was like, there's like a web of movies you need to watch before you get to this one. It's just rough. This is like, we're steeped in lore at this point. Jeez.
I'm trying to think of what was the Shia LaBeouf MCU meme. When I saw that killed me.
Which one?
What is it?
1 second.
I'm gonna try to look it up.
Yeah, I need to. Which one was it? I think I posted it on my thing, but it's the one where he sits in a theater, and he's like, his eyes are like he didn't sleep for forever, and I need to find it and I'll send it to you. But basically, I think what it was is like it's like MCU fan 20 years from now, getting into it and realizing they have to watch like 45 movies and
Yeah.
10 TV shows.
I actually think that this
Hmm.
is illustrative of the earlier point about like whether or not this is actually cinema or like television on a big screen and everything. And like even South Park has gotten into serialization in a way that they hadn't in the past, and it's a little bit more difficult. Like if you watch even a South Park rerun, oh wait a minute, was this before or after Principal Victoria got fired, or is this happening after Integrity Farms, or so on and so forth? But I mean, it's just one of those things where like there's that joke in season 5 with Butter's very own episode, where he's following his dad and his dad goes into the gay porn theater. It's like, oh, what movie was he going to go see? Fisting Fireman's 9. I haven't seen 1 through 8. It's just kind of like you can actually argue that Fisting Fireman's 9 is probably more cinematic than most of the Marvel universe, in that at least you can just go into Fisting Fireman's 9 without seeing 1 through 8 and still get what's going on.
I would argue, I agree with what you're saying in its in your the spirit of what you're saying, but I would argue that prior to Infinity War and Endgame, like if we forget about Phase 4 altogether, because Phase 4 is when they have if you feel like, how can I say this? If you feel like serialization is too much of a problem in the MCU, clearly the end game is when they jumped that shark. Clearly, because up until those 2 movies, like for just before Infinity War and Endgame, when you just had Phase 1, 2, and 3 up to the end of it, I would argue that Avengers 2 and maybe perhaps Iron Man 3, and to a lesser extent maybe Thor 2 are just about the only movies that you really need to have seen, like all the stuff that came before it. I mean, with the exception, of course, I mean, would you say it's fair when we're talking about movies to say that Captain America 2 and 3 are just as much of a standalone movie as just about any other well-made trilogies 2 and 3? Like, you don't need to have seen all the other MCU movies. You just need to have seen the previous Captain America movies. Just as much as, say, like, Back to the Future 2 and 3, or something like that.
My brain is cranking through those movies right now. I'm going to at least tentatively at the moment agree with you that yes, those are. That's a coherent trilogy.
Yeah, I just think that there's the 3 trilogies, right? There's well, I guess Thor 3 didn't. Thor 3 did end before that. So there's Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man all have 3 films. They all have trilogies before Endgame. What's up?
I found it. Sorry. Anyway,
go
ahead.
I literally have a screen full of Shia LaBeouf memes in front of me. I can't.
Oh yeah. Let me just.
I want to find it. Like,
let me share my screen. That would be the easiest thing.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so how do you share my screen? So what was the trilogy you're comparing it to with Nat? The Iron Man?
Any trilogy for that matter. But
any trilogy? Yeah, making trilogies are tough.
I'm just saying that in terms of if we're saying that a movie needs to be standalone, I would argue that sequels to something should have a little bit of leeway, because I mean, Back to the Future 2 doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you haven't seen the first one. Lord of the Rings 2 doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you haven't seen the first one.
I was going to say, I definitely think it's better if the movie can stand alone without having to do the homework with the others. But it's sometimes you do need to have the prior experience.
All I was getting at is that I think the issue of the serialization definitely ramped up in a big way after Endgame, and I think that complaining about that as an issue with Infinity War and Endgame is kind of weird, because I don't think you can compare those to any other movie that's ever been made. Nobody's ever done this before.
Right.
This has literally never happened before.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the question is, should have that
I
been
don't know.
done? Like,
I don't know.
I think this is for TV. I think what makes more sense is what they're doing with Star Wars. I guess there's like multiple TV shows that are completely different stories set within the same universe, and then you can pick and choose which one you want to, which rabbit hole you want to go down. With this, and are you seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So here's
on the Skype thing or what?
Yeah,
Oh,
on the
yeah, there it
Skype
is.
So new MCU fans from 2056 having to watch 182 movies and 35 TV shows just to properly understand the new movie. Yeah, that's pretty much
Fair.
what it's a problem. Like it's basically a franchise for people that have the time, which obviously me, an adult with kids, don't. If my kids were older, I could just go with them, but unfortunately, they're coming out at the wrong time. Maybe I'll catch up in 10 years or something.
I don't judge anybody for not having the time, but I did want to just make one little argument. I know Matt told me earlier, many months ago, that he doesn't necessarily agree with this, but I think that this argument is less relevant now than it ever has been in the past of cinema, because we're living in a new age now, with the internet being what it is, with streaming services being what they are. I mean, if you have Disney Plus, we're only talking about we're only talking about time at that point. And again, I'm not judging anyone for not having the time to watch all the movies, but we are in a time where there's unparalleled access to these films. And I just feel like right now, if somebody makes it a priority, if they want to stay up to date with these things, I don't think there's anything preventing them from doing it.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, I think I generally agree, but I mean, it's just one of those things where I just think about priorities, and I mean, as well as anybody that I'm like a lifelong Star Trek fan.
Right.
And I mean, I can tell you right now that I would rather watch Star Trek Nemesis on a continuous loop for 48 hours straight than watch anything that they call Star Trek that came from Alex Kurtzman.
Okay.
So
I think that's a fair, based on our previous conversations, that sounds like you.
So yeah, I mean, it's just like I not only will I not give Alex Kurtzman any of my money, I will not give him my time anymore. I mean, I won't watch Fast and Furious in space again. I will not.
Wait, you saw 9 in theaters?
Oh yeah, Star Trek Beyond. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
you said Fast and Furious. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. You must not have realized that the Fast and the Furious franchise actually did go to space at this point.
Oh,
well, they're supposed to be going to space.
No, they already did. Did you see the last one? They went up into space.
Oh, that's right. That's right. They did. 2 of them.
I'm sorry, Matt. I assumed I knew what you were talking about. I didn't.
No, I was talking about Star Trek Beyond because it was directed by one of the Fast and Furious.
The Fast and Furious guy. Yeah.
I was still with my ex-girlfriend when I went to go see that in theaters, and she actually told me after the movie that she could tell when I was really pissed off because we were holding hands, and I was actually starting to hurt her, apparently, because I was squeezing her hand too hard.
It's like a lie detector test or something.
Yeah.
You must have been squeezing her hand throughout that entire movie.
Yeah.
Not on that dirt bike scene.
God.
I don't want to get off topic, but Matt, I'm just curious. I know Nemesis is one of the worst of the first 11 movies that they made, but was Nemesis directed by Riker?
No, Nemesis was directed by Stuart Baird.
Oh, I don't know who that is. Okay.
Well,
That's
he's
probably
an
why
editor.
it wasn't as good as the previous two.
No, yeah, Jonathan Frakes directed First Contact and Insurrection.
Right. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just wanted to see. I wasn't sure if he did that one or not.
Yeah.
By the way, we're more dramatically lit than most of the MCU movies.
The Nemesis was a horrendous looking movie.
Yeah,
but it was dramatic. It was a movie. That's the best example. Basically, the MCU looks like the Next Generation TV show, whereas even when they shifted to the movies, they changed their lighting. They made it more dramatic. It wasn't hospital lighting.
I agree. You can see a big difference between the well, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like both First Contact and Insurrection had more contrast and looked more like a movie than Generations did.
Generations is a bit brighter for sure, but it was still a movie. Like it was still done. Like you definitely noticed.
But
obviously,
I would
the biggest
argue
difference,
that the MCU movies are somewhere halfway between those. When I say those, I mean Next Gen TV and those movies.
Yes, I mean all the TNG was adequately lit. It's just that with the TV you usually just have set lighting, and it's not like it's not a soap opera or a sitcom, but it's still a set that's pre-lit.
That's true.
Yeah. So it's kind of like tends to be fairly uniform. And I agree that the MCU movies have dramatic moments within them. It's just that they could be a bit more dramatic, but it's fine. I mean, we've already tread that subject.
Yeah. Real quick before we go any further, I just wanted to just say this one thing is that I know I kind of touched on it very briefly, but when I was talking about what was it, Endgame and Infinity War, but just wanted to point out that it's worth mentioning, just as long as we're just talking about Avengers here, not the whole MCU, but that movie alone should deserve a certain amount of recognition, because that's, like I kind of said before, there's nothing's been like that has ever been achieved before. I mean, it's not just that they made a franchise with 6 films. That's not what they did. I mean, this is several. It's like this film's like a realization of what the Avengers comic book was, in a way. I mean, you're talking about 4 separate franchises that have their own story, their own heroes, dealing with their own villains, their own issues, personal issues, or whatever that's going on. And they successfully combined all those into one single movie where those stories continued on with each of those characters. And then afterward did a pretty good job of making that moment affect them for their continuing stories going on after that. I mean, this would be like as if, I know this is a bad example, but I'm just saying, like, this would be like as if we had, a spy thing or something like that, and they made a movie where at the height of their success and the height of their popularity, you had like James Bond and you had, the Tom Cruise character from Mission Impossible and someone from The Saint, and they're all together in a movie and they're all trying to achieve one goal together. They all are, adequately written like their characters from their own movies. And then they run into like the whole crew from Man from U.N.C.L.E. or something weird like that. And it's a big team up type thing. It's never been done before. I mean, if you had like a Westerns somewhere that you made and you had like Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen from the Magnificent Seven, like the actual characters, because they survived, or you had like Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach from Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And you had like, well, I guess they both died, but I was going to say like Paul Newman and Redford, all in one movie together, and they all run into John Wayne or something like that. I mean, that's what this would be like. And you're talking about taking those stories from completely separate movies putting them together into one movie, having them all continue to grow, and then come out the other side. Like, that's never been done before. And others have tried, and failed. Since the success of this movie, people keep trying to replicate it and they can't do it. The Universal monster movie thing failed twice. They tried to get it going with Dracula. They tried to get it going with Tom Cruise in that Mummy movie. Failure. You got the Godzilla movies kind of did it. They tried to do that, and they're okay. They're fun, but they're very bad movies. DC can't get their shit together at all. I mean, it hasn't been replicated yet. It had never been done before.
I don't know if that's a goal anybody should have. It's basically a money grabbing goal. Like, it's not necessary. Like this whole 20-some movies. Though
I'm talking about 6. I'm just talking about the
yeah, 6. Well, and by the way, I mean I rated like Infinity War 6 and Endgame 7. I feel like they're average and lower than average movies.
You didn't see the stuff that came before it.
Exactly. It's again the excuse of not seeing. I saw some of them. I had some context, and there's nothing there. It was just a bunch of noise.
No.
Just a bunch of noise.
Those two movies are different. That's not this. You can't that's not like saying, I watched. I'm trying to think of one that came right before that. Like, I saw Thor 3. And there was nothing there. It was nothing there. I didn't see it. Whatever. That's a fair assessment if you felt that way about one of those previous movies. Avengers: Infinity War and Avengers: Endgame are that, like it or not, prefer. You say maybe this never should have been done. That's fine. Maybe it should have been done as a television franchise and not as movies. All valid arguments. Fine, but those two movies are the culmination of, at the time, I want to say 16 movies, something like that, maybe more, maybe 18 movies. I don't know. A lot of films had been made up to that point, leading into those two movies. That has never been done before. You look at the Bond franchise; those are all completely disconnected movies, with the exception of the Daniel Craig 4, 5, whatever. You look at the Fast and the Furious movies, you could say that those all bleed together, but that is a bold statement, if there ever was one. Those horror franchises that get up into double digits, that is not the same thing at all.
No, none of them are. None of them, because this is combining different characters from different movies. I understand.
Not just that. We're talking about the culmination of that many films, that much story going into those two things, and it was written as a kind of an end point. Like, this, yes, they did continue it on afterward, but you could get to the end of Endgame and just stop. It's a very good stopping point.
Which
like those two, that's a fair argument, fair. But my brother was pissed off when he found out there was going to be more movies.
Like, whatever happened to reboots? Couldn't we just stop, give it a few years, and then reboot these characters? Like, whatever happened to that?
They've got a hell of a lot more story to tell. They haven't even touched on half their roster,
which makes it a TV show.
Put it on a TV
screen.
I'm not disagreeing.
Don't put it in the theater.
All I'm saying is,
make it 40-minute episodes. We had like these big shows, like the now it's House of the Dragon and the Lord of the Rings thing. Before that, we had like the these expensive shows. Just do that. Like, well, why all these movies?
Again, I think it's a fair thing to say that maybe it should have all been streamed. Maybe it all.
I mean, comic books are serialized. Why not serialize this?
I know. And I'm not. Wait, hold on a second, Matt. Hold on. All I'm trying to say, if you want to make that argument, that's fine. To say it should have been a TV show, that's okay. But I'm saying, for you to say that there was nothing there in Infinity War and Endgame, but you didn't see what led up to it, that's like watching the last 4 episodes of Game of Thrones and saying there's no relevance to anything that's going on in this thing. It's just a bunch of dragons flying around and it doesn't mean anything, whatever. Those two movies have so much meat in them, so much substance in them, especially surrounding the main 3 characters. Those 3 characters have all been through a huge journey up to that point, and they managed to somehow tell a story with so many characters, and yet the 3 of them all have a vital story component where their characters grow and evolve in those 3 movies in a really compelling way. And if you didn't think there was anything of substance in them, I would argue it's because you didn't see what came before it.
I mean, I saw what they were going for, but it wasn't anything tremendous. It was TV quality. That's pretty much it. It's the TV storytelling, like an average, maybe above average TV show. Not even that, an average TV show storytelling.
Okay,
The
so
acting was like better quality than the TV show, but the storytelling is just very serialized. TNG
I,
had better episodes than those movies.
okay, so I'm just gonna interject.
Go for it.
Okay, first of all, when it comes to Game of Thrones, if you just watch those last 4 episodes and said there's nothing here, actually the sad thing is there really was nothing there in the last 4 episodes. It was
Perhaps
just
it was a bad
shit.
example.
It was, I mean, like, it was a really good series, and then it led to absolutely nothing. It was a complete abortion of an end of a series. I wasted 7 years of my life on that show, so to have nothing come from it. But I mean, the thing is, Gil, like, I agree with you entirely that this is just television projected on a big screen with a communal audience. And most of the time nowadays, it's not even worth seeing it on the big screen with a communal audience because usually the projection quality is shit. A lot of times they forget to remove the 3D box, even though 3D has gone out of style. Thank God.
Thank
And,
God.
there's probably going to be some snot-nosed kid, screaming in the theater and all that crap, which even diminishes the experience more than it would otherwise be. And I mean, I know that you have your own projector set up in your own house, and like, why go out to the theater? But maybe, just maybe, there's a silver lining to this, where, like, maybe I don't want to go see the next Thor movie. I still haven't gone to the theater to see the next Thor movie, even though I like Christian Bale and all that crap. Maybe maybe there's not a whole lot of reason for us to go out and do that. But you know what? Since the unspecified virus of unknown origins hit, it's been hard to get asses back into seats.
Yep.
And maybe, just maybe, this, however vacuous we might think that the MCU is in terms of its ideas, in terms of its execution, and so on and so forth, it gets butts in seats. And it gets money thrown toward movie theaters, and it's keeping that alive, even though it almost died. So maybe we could at least take a moment and say thank you, MCU, for at least keeping movie theaters alive.
Yeah, no, I'm not denying that.
I'm glad you made that, because I'm glad
no,
you made that point. I was going to say it, but I'm glad you said it.
I made that point in the past too. I mean, the Scorsese was critical of those movies, like being like what you would call it, like amusement park rides. But then people like Paul Thomas Anderson said, you know what? But like the new Spider-Man movie is gonna come out, and it's like gonna get a lot of people into the movies. And also, what I said about the Scorsese thing is that these movies, even though they're subpar, will get a kid excited about movies, and then later on he's going to discover like the masters of cinema and foreign films and all these great movies and Dark City. But the way for that kid to be charmed by the movies, he needs to watch one of these movies. But that doesn't negate the fact that these could be better done with more freedom and more difference between them, because the whole point of a movie is it's supposed to be an island. It's supposed to be a thing you walk into, you lose yourself in. You don't have to worry about, like, in most cases, what came before or after. I get it. If you want to make a trilogy, that's great. If you want to make a saga of 9 movies like Star Wars over the course of 40 years, that's fine. But to make 20-some movies in the span of 15 years is too much. It's too much. They should really gone the TV Star Wars way, where if you want to have, maybe don't connect these. Like, okay, you did it once, let it go. Don't do the whole Avengers thing again. If you want to have an Avengers movie, have an Avengers movie, but then create a different universe with like, just Captain America, or just like, so if I want to follow that thread, I'll follow it. But like this whole connecting of all these movies together, I don't think should have been done. I mean, you could have done maybe 6 movies leading up to the Avengers, but it seems like Jason says I needed to watch 16 movies. That is just not
the
function. That's not the
Avengers, just
purpose of movies. That's what I like movies. Like the Oscars comes around, I can watch 10 movies and basically be prepped for the show. Whereas with this, it's TV. It's like the Emmys. I can't watch the Emmys because I haven't seen 90% of the TV that's out there. But that's what's great about movies, is that it's more concise, it's more manageable. That if you watch the top 10, 20 movies of the year, which is manageable for most movies people to watch in a year, then you kind of got a good sense of where movie is, like where the movies are at the moment in time. But with TV, did you watch this show? Did you watch that show? No, there's no way I'm going to watch all these shows. And this is what this feels like.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a fair point, Gil. But I mean, I also want to echo some of what Jason said too, because even though like it's too much, not just for you, Gil, but I mean I've heard that from a lot of different people too. Like, there's too many comic book movies. There's too much to see. I really can't keep up with this. I think those are issues that MCU has to resolve to be sustainable and to be able to move forward in the future. Like my wife, she barely pays attention to these movies. She'll go with me if I ask her to, and she'll get excited occasionally for some, but she's definitely not following it like the way Jason or I would. And I think she's more of a good example of probably more so of what an average like film goer might be like. And I think the more that MCU requires people to do homework to be able to enjoy these films, the more detriment it's going to cause to the overall experience, and it's going to they're just going to wind up doing not as well as a result. But
I would actually argue that that's true. Or I'd not argue. I would also like to say that's probably how I feel as well.
Yeah, I think. God, I almost lost what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
But I do think to Jason's point, it is remarkable what they have managed to accomplish. And even though it's maybe not necessarily for you or Matt, like the experience of being a kid who's excited to go to a movie and see Spider-Man or Captain America, or even Captain Marvel and some of the other female superheroes, to have that representation and to have that be a gateway to other things. I definitely think that's a cap in the MCU hat. That's definitely something to be celebrated, and the fact that they have helped to keep movie theaters going. That was one of the first things I said at the start of the conversation. Like some of the first big events that people started to go back to theaters for after the pandemic was the MCU, and that was after having things like Tenet and a couple of other fairly different titles. Like they're definitely helping to reinvigorate movie theaters, and I definitely think that is a huge benefit to all of us.
It wasn't Nolan, and it wasn't Scorsese, and it wasn't Alfonso Cuarón. Like those are the ones that just made it to the Oscars, and that's it. And we all agreed that Tenet wasn't Nolan's best. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of I didn't even realize what was happening when it was happening right in front of me, in the early days, which was, like I was working projection at a multiplex, and we switched from film to digital, and their idea of a projectionist was one dude or gal walking around just making sure that the digital projectors were turning on at the right time. And that was only if they didn't need to call them down to work the concession stand. I started working IMAX, doing IMAX film. They were paying me, what would now be less than minimum wage in Arizona to do that. and then I got to work on Dunkirk several years later after, a whole bunch of things changed in my life. And the projector that we use on Dunkirk hadn't been used since Interstellar. So, I mean, like, it had just been sitting there collecting cobwebs since Christopher Nolan's last movie. I came in, we did that for 5 weeks. I was supposed to come in and do the same thing on Tenet, but the unspecified virus of unknown origins hit, and that stifled that. And yeah, I mean, movie theaters have been sadly, not doing well for a long time. And part of it has been that, the movie theaters themselves have been killing themselves because,
Sure.
well, I mean, if I could have a 2K projection system in my own house, why am I going to go out and spend, $14 and, plus concessions, plus everything else to go watch your 2K projector in the theater? uh like, it's odd that anybody projects film anymore. It's odd that, projection quality is actually a major priority of the theater companies. And yeah, I mean, it does take these big movies that are made by Marvel and made by Disney, no matter how much I might not like what they're doing with the money that they're putting on the screen. They're getting butts in seats. And so long as butts are getting into seats, every so often, the smaller movie is going to get a butt in the seat, and somebody's going to watch it the way that that movie should be watched too. So I'll take it in stride. I'm not going to throw a lot of my own money at these movies, but I'm not going to sit here and say that they should go away.
No, of course. I don't think anybody is saying that. It's just
Yeah.
that I just wish that they took 2 steps back and allowed the creative people to take 2 steps forward. That's
Yes.
all. I just wish that
Precisely.
it wouldn't be as micromanaged. That I
Yes.
know that there's some
Here, here.
variation between these movies, but I wish that it feels like TV has become that way, where showrunners and creators get more freedom in making TV very unique, all different shows in different ways. And it's sad that it's not the reverse in movies. That's why a lot of people say that TV right now is where the serious drama is because that this is what we have at the movies. It's kids movies for adults. Like it's live action animation. So I just wish that there was more like if you're gonna get top talent, let that top talent go loose. Let them do their thing. And you have the money. You have so much money. If you lose out on Eternals or something else, like or whatever movie that doesn't like make the 5, 6, 8 billion dollars in the theaters, you'll be fine. Take a chance. Do an R-rated like superhero movie. Try something for a change. Like you don't need to be safe all the time. If they did that, then I would have no objection. And like Matt, I would just pick and choose which ones I'll go to based on my interest.
Marvel is doing it, by the way. We have R-rated Daredevil, or not Daredevil, Deadpool. Next Deadpool. This is supposed to be R-rated, and I've heard rumblings that Blade may wind up being that way too. So
yeah, I would hope that it would, but I hear bad. I've been hearing some real scary rumors about it.
Yeah, they're definitely having some serious production issues for sure. But I mean, I definitely agree with you, Gil. The more artistic chances that they take, the better. I've always thought like when studios allow commercial filmmaking to leverage a lot more of those artistic abilities, you get the best stuff. Like T2 being a perfect example. Total action movie, but there's so much more to it, and it is because you get to start to leverage some of those artistic tricks that really make it something special.
Yeah, so here's hoping. Like I said, I'm not. I never been mad at like movies coming out that I don't like. It's just that there's too many of these. There's only like 4 Transformers or 5. Like this is just way too many average movies or subpar movies. But yeah, I don't care. There's many movies out there, and I'm glad, like Matt said, is keeping the theaters alive. And I'll just hope that the next one, hopefully Black Panther. I might be remotely interested in that, although I kind of got the gist of it with the first one. But
I could be way off on this. I'm just saying I would like. I'm hoping that they're once again that Marvel and Disney are lying to us in the trailers, because they've been doing that for a while now. But even though they said they weren't going to, I would really like to see them recast Black Panther.
Oh, T'Challa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at first everybody was like, "Oh, don't do it." But I mean, even his family was like, the role is so important, and it's kind of like part of his legacy. Like, you should just recast it. I mean, it's going to be weird that his last appearance was in Endgame, and then all of a sudden it's like dies off screen between movies. That'd be weird.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I don't think that's going to happen during this one, but it's definitely something I anticipate happening sooner than later, just because the character is so important. But now that we're dabbling into the multiverse territories, that's an easier thing to do, to bring in a T'Challa from like another universe and have him be the Black
I didn't
Panther
even think about that.
here. Yeah,
yeah,
I
or
mean,
just
now
reboot.
it's like,
Yeah, just
yeah.
yeah.
I feel like
Full
it's
of Rick
coming.
and Morty.
I feel like it's coming for Harry Potter, though. It's been a while since they wrapped up that franchise, and the spinoff hasn't been doing terribly well. For sooner or later they're gonna kickstart that.
Yeah, who knows?
Oh no,
Warner
but J.K.
Brothers
Rowling's
needs
too much
to-
of a transphobe.
Harry
At least
Potter's so much bigger than her
the
now.
stories are not like transphobic, so I guess that's all that matters to them.
Neither is J.K. Rowling, but
Yeah. But what I mean is like as far as the perception. In any case, well, I think this was
Anyway.
pretty good. I mean, it's good. It's been a while since we had some headbutting in this show. It's just too many like love fests lately.
Don't worry,
so.
more to come. More to come.
Yeah, we should think about the next one then.